Now, a number of reports that have been released in the recent past have shown that without a strong manufacturing sector, Kenya will never be able to create jobs, reduce poverty and achieve middle income status in coming years. And that can clearly be seen in the example of the largely untapped potential that sectors such as the leather industry hold. Studies show that while Kenya earned 13.6 billion shillings from leather exports in 2013, had the country exported footwear, the country's earnings would have gone up nearly 6 times to 73 billion shillings. Now, that illustration is what forms the basis of our discussion this evening with Industrialization Cabinet Secretary Adan Mohammed. Thank you so much for joining us on the Citizen Business Center. And of course, we'd love you to join the conversation if you'll be joining us from our Twitter handles. It's at Citizen TV Kenya and the hashtag is Citizen Business. Do send us an SMS as well on 22422. CS, thank you so much once again for joining us this evening. Of course, the Kenya Industrial Transformation Program is all about reviving Kenya's industries. What will the transformation look like? What will success look like once Kenya has achieved that status?
Well, I think for a very long time we have been trying to do too many things without necessarily getting into, an expected outcome position. And so it's no wonder the manufacturing sector has been, for a long time, stagnating between 10 to 11% as a contributor to GDP. So what we have done is, through consultation with various players, especially the private sector development partners, is to really ask ourselves, if we've got to get to the middle income status as a country, we've got to be able to switch from being a trading country into a production-based country. And so a number of issues have really made our industries to stagnate, not to do very well. We've suffered largely because of high cost of production, but also to some extent due to some of our own policies for a very long time that tended to encourage more people who are importing and not necessarily producing. And that has now changed, and a lot of things are happening. And that is what this plan is intending to outline in a very clear, simple form that we know where we need to get to and also describes how we need to get there.
What are some of the sectors that you'll be looking at when we look at industrialization? And I know I read part of it, and leather stands out quite strongly in the presentation that you did earlier today. What other sectors are targeted for industrialization?
Well, all sectors across the manufacturing spectrum is actually going to be a beneficiary of this, because what the plan seeks to do is to really see how we can improve the whole of the manufacturing sector. Some will succeed better than others just because of the structure of that specific industry. So we look at sectors that are largely labor intensive. We've got significant pool of labor, so that sector has a better chance to do well than sectors, for example, that are heavy industries that are more dependent on using electricity and energy. But the point is, what we want to do is to really create a program with significant input from the players themselves on how we can revive our industries going forward. And we've developed a 5-point program, to be honest. First is to work on flagship projects for key sectors that we believe we have competitive advantage. If we are good at 3,000 meter race, we run that. We don't want to run 100 meters. So we want to be selective. And so industries that are largely labor intensive, that don't require a lot of capital investment, those are the ones that we've chosen to focus on. And that's how leather comes in, that's how textile and apparel comes in, that's how agro-processing comes in. It would also play a key role in dealing with some of the challenges that we have around security. Today we are spending significant amount of our budget in dealing with security. I think what manufacturing and what private sector can do is, if we cure the root cause of this problem, which is to a large extent unemployment, then we will end up spending less money on dealing with some of these issues. So they are all interconnected, and we focus deliberately on sectors that we think can deal with some of those other social problems and actually make things happen. We're also focusing on SMEs as a second very important part of this program. And thirdly, we are focusing on making sure that the business environment is extremely improved compared to what we have been doing as well. And recently, only last week, the President signed into law a number of bills that are geared towards improving the business environment. We also want to create an industrial development fund. This is a new concept in this country. We have sectors that have suffered because the commercial banks have ignored because of the risk levels. And yet, these sectors really contribute to this country. And so, we're thinking of how can we structure something to support some of these industries that we can deal with in a targeted manner. And finally, very importantly, is to really work out how can we bring this plan to life. And so we've set up what we call a delivery unit that deals with implementation of this program. And that is probably the most important part of our work in dealing with this particular plan.
Let's break down some of the challenges that you mentioned earlier. And many local industries are already struggling with, competition. If you look at the textile industry, there's Mitumba. The food industry, agro-processing, paper as well, the Chinese products when it comes to leather and other things. How will you then assure the new local manufacturers, so to speak, in the light industries, that they are assured of a market?
Well, one of the things that we have taken note of is we don't want to overprotect industries. That can only work so far. I think a more longer-term sustainable way to help our industries is to make sure they are much more competitive and are able to compete effectively with the rest of the world. How are we doing that? Significant amount of spend on infrastructure that the government is doing today is geared towards supporting manufacturing to a large extent. The cost of logistics today of moving things from Mombasa to Nairobi is high. Standard gauge railway will transform that. The energy, both in terms of supply but also cost, would also play a key role. Improvements in the port of Mombasa has played a significant role in easing trade activities. So the key thing is, how do we make our companies to be more efficient, more competitive? That, I think, is the most important impact that we need to actually deal with. I think the rest, on some of the sectors that you talked about, for example, around Mitumba and the others, is as these industries are supported, they become more competitive, as we are doing, for example, in textiles. We're doing extremely well. We will then start raining on through policies on the likes of Mitumba. But those two processes need have...
However, CS, if we look at the textile industry, we're doing well because we're importing textiles, and then which go through the EPZ and come out as produce of Kenya, but our local textile industries are actually not doing well.
That is true, and that is part of some of the sectors that we want to target through the Industrial Development Fund, because textile is a very capital-intensive, high electricity consuming, and this hasn't helped before now. And so what we are doing is we want to see how we can target some of these sectors, locate them into areas where power supply and power cost is much better than it is. And so we're looking at Naivasha, which is the source of a lot of our clean energy today, where we believe that the energy cost will be significantly lower than it is elsewhere. And so we recognize and appreciate the challenges industries have faced. What I think we are putting forward is a solution. We've got the markets. Today, many people look at Kenya as a 40 million population, 55 billion GDP, but we have access to the GDP of the world to the tune of $29 trillion. The whole of the EU market is as good as local market for us. We can send things there quota-free, duty-free. We do the same in the US. Now, what is left is to make sure that what we produce here can access those markets and compete with products. Now,
but how are we going to ensure that our quality reaches the quality that can match the international markets?
And that, I think, is one of the key issues we're dealing with. There are some non-tariff barriers that countries put in place to prevent competition or things coming from other countries. These are all barriers that are happening, and every consecutive year WTO and other organizations are trying to remove most of these things. But I think what is important to note is the competitive space globally, especially in manufacturing, is changing. Where people have been moving traditionally from Europe, the US, into China because China became the factory of the world because of low cost of labor, things are now beginning to change. The cost of labor is now much higher, and people are now looking for alternative place. And that is where Africa and some of the Southeast Asian countries are competing to look. And so, as a way of preparing ourselves to grab these opportunities, we are making sure that our cost of operations in this country is good, or as competitive as we can. But equally important is to improve the business environment, and that we do directly through regulations, laws, but also through making sure that some of the way we do things in this country are much more business friendly. And there's a lot of improvement that has happened, and we just need to build on that.
All right. CS, who are the key stakeholders in this transformation of industry? Because when we talk industry, the majority of Kenyans feel closed out, and it's a place for the big boys. And you mentioned SMEs earlier, and I'm just curious, how can SMEs find opportunities in this new transformation agenda, or where is there space? Well,
SMEs are the backbone of our economy. I actually think the big boys contribute very little. For every 10 jobs that are created today in Kenya, 8 of them are created by SMEs. And a lot of our people depend on products that are made by the SMEs. So they are at the heart of this strategy that we are pursuing to make sure that we can build on their successes, improve some of the things that they are doing today. So that is a really key part of what we are doing. So they are a very important stakeholder in this. The government has made deliberate efforts to create access through 30% procurement law to make sure that this group actually succeeds. And so we want to see how most of them can graduate up, but also those that are at the lower level get support. And the Industrial Development Fund that we are targeting is also geared towards supporting some of these segments that the commercial banks may not, because of some of their perceptions about their risk status, actually cannot get. So the stakeholders are the SMEs, they are the big boys, they are the consumers, because many times people think that protecting through duties and customs penalties is the way to go. I think that is only a temporary solution. We are able to compete, and we are doing that. That is why today we are the biggest exporter of apparels in the US, in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. We can do it in that sector, and there are many others. Horticulture, today we are doing billions. We are doing the same in tea and in coffee. So I think what is happening is market opportunities are expanding. Our people, through use of technology and improved farming methods, are improving as well. But it's just making sure that we make the environment conducive so that we can really move that much faster in order to compete much better in this world that is much more competitive than we've ever seen.
I know there's quite a lot that has been done in the leather industry, and there's revival of new factories. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Well, leather is, we are one of the, biggest countries in terms of livestock across the whole of this region. And yet, most of our leather is going out as semi-processed wet blue status. And if we are able to convert leather, raw hides into a finished product, the value addition is at least 12 times. And that is an opportunity that is totally untapped, and we haven't got, And that is just an example of an industry that has been ignored. Yet is an industry that we have significant advantage. The raw materials are there, the skills are there, the markets are there. It just requires people to be organized and do things much more efficiently. So we are planning to see how we can put together the tanneries, the shoe manufacturers, in a manner that looks like a cluster, so that everybody within that ecosystem can work together and be able to actually drive that. So the AGOA market, for example, that has just opened up for us, is a good opportunity where we can make shoes and others. I would encourage you at some stage to go to Kariokor market. Within a 5-acre plot, over 7,000 Kenyans are making shoes for many people, and yet they are not able to get, the leather that they can actually use. So part of the policy, regulations, and directions that we need to do is to see how we can support players like that as a way of driving that. So we are on a journey. We have clear plans, measurable, that we can actually put some time scale around it. And hopefully in the next 2 or so years, we should be able to see significant improvement within our manufacturing sector.
All right. So yes, as we wind up, you have the advantage of working in the financial sector and now in the public sector. And one of the challenges that most business people, whether SMEs or big business, face is access to capital. In this industrial transformation, the SMEs are going to face similar challenges. Is there a plan to work out something with the local financial institutions?
Well, the SMEs, today we have billions of shillings that are dedicated through development partners and commercial banks that are geared towards supporting the SMEs. So, for example, Africa Development Bank has given a line of credit, you know, to Equity Bank and some of the other commercial banks towards supporting the SMEs. But I think it's fair to say that the perception of risk that SMEs pose to commercial banks is exaggerated and needs to be dealt with in a manner that makes it easy. And one of the things that we are doing as a ministry is to see how we can de-risk this sector by making sure that if the government policy on this sector, for example, is seen to be much more longer term, there are deliberate efforts to support this segment, then the risk perception of this are likely to actually change. But the one very important thing that I think will transform what we are doing within the country as far as private sector is concerned is the recent laws that the President Kenyatta actually assented to. And these are the Companies Act, the new one since 1948. We've always relied on that old act. Now we've got a new one. We've got a new Insolvency Act, and we've got Special Economic Zone Bill and many others, all geared towards supporting the private sector, which is the engine of our growth, people who pay our bills and create the wealth for us in this country. All
right. CS, thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts as well as your dreams for Kenya's industrial transformation. We appreciate your presence here.